Last week, I'd invited you to look back on some of the gone year's best conversations on the podcast along with me. This week, I'd like to take you through 5 more conversations. But first, let me apologize to those guests whose conversations I'm unable to play out for time constraints. It's been really difficult for me to pick just a few. In the end, it pretty much came down to tossing coins. The first conversation we are returning to is with Dr. Ratin Roy on the brief history of macroeconomics in the last 100 years and how it needs to change once again. Both the episodes with him on this conversation were a hit with listeners. Few economists are as articulate as Ratin is, and even fewer speak with clarity and directness as he does.
Macroeconomics is kind of, sort of up in the air right now. It needs to be redefined according to many people. If you agree with that.
I completely agree with it. I completely agree with it because I have always believed that simplistic macroeconomics is stupid. I have always believed that, especially for countries like India, which also have the growth problem, that casting things in terms of cyclical and counter-cyclical, pretending that short-term trends give you answers to long-term outcomes, and a silly belief in the emerging markets hypothesis 10 years after it is dead, brings to the fore again the fundamental question that I raised in the beginning of this conversation, which is the question Keynes asked. What is it that you want from the macroeconomy? So what you want from the macroeconomy now is an increase in the level of output to at least pre-COVID levels. If you're a developing country, what you also want from the macroeconomy now is a return to a path where we could see our way to an optimistic economic future, where again it would be credible to talk about growth rates that would double GDP and hopefully per capita incomes going forward.
And we've seen in the last few years that not only in developing economies like India, but even in advanced economies, monetary policy and reduced interest rates are not able to deliver that.
Yes, and that is for a very simple reason. There was an arrogant misunderstanding in the theory of efficient markets that if the central bank is able to incentivize people to invest less when prices are high. Let me explain that. So when people invest, they invest more if capital is cheap. You can make capital more expensive by increasing the interest rate on capital, which is the price of capital. And the central bank can do that by increasing the rate at which banks borrow from it. So if I want money from a bank and I go to the bank and the bank says, okay, I'll give you the money, but the bank decides to go to the central bank and borrow that money, then it has to pay the central bank some interest on the money and it will lend to you at that interest rate plus some margin. So the higher the interest rate the central bank charges, the higher will be the rate the bank charges you. And the lower the interest rate the central bank charges, the lower will be the rate the bank charges you, was the theory. And then the second part of the theory was the higher the rate the bank charges me, the less I will invest. And the lower the rate the bank charges me, the more I will invest. And that is what the theory of efficient markets rested on. So effectively what we did in the globe is we converted the price of capital into an administered price, not a market determined price. Note, if the central bank is setting the interest rate, it is then effectively setting the price of capital. It was a very clever trick that was employed over the last 20 years and nobody noticed that effectively we had abandoned market economics when it came to the price of capital. But unfortunately, this abandoning of market economics and what I would call the communism of central banks failed. And it failed because when times of depression came, when central banks lowered interest rates, either as in countries like India, the commercial banks did not lower them by a proportionate amount, or even if they lowered them in developed countries, people did not take up the money. So a situation came where they kept lowering the interest rate till a point where, as in Japan now for over 10 years, the interest rate became zero. And still people were not investing. Conversely, before 2008, when central banks tried to raise the interest rates, the proportionate fall in economic activity was not commensurate with that. So something was not working for a long time. And therefore, now when central banks are talking Keynesian, they are talking this because they are economic modeling. I don't know if the Reserve Bank of India ever had a credible model. I'm sure they did. Has been thrown out of the window. And therefore, now they are putting the onus on government and saying you do fiscal policy, but the governments in turn are saying no, because we don't know what fiscal policy is going to do. Because you've been telling us for 20 years that we have to worry about debt and deficit, so we are going to use monetary policy. So it's become a sort of game where the generals in a war, the army wants the navy to do its job, and the navy wants the army to do its job, and that reflects a confusion in macroeconomics. So my solution to that confusion is very simple. You have to decide what you want to do with the macroeconomy. Now, what you want to do, unfortunately, depends on what you want to spend on. So let me give you an example. If the governments of India decide to borrow more, and they decide to take all that money and build 1,000 statues of great leaders, as opposed to the governments of India decide to borrow more, and they put all that money into infrastructure, low-cost housing, health, education. Obviously, it would make a difference to your calculation of whether that enhanced borrowing was justifiable or not, depending on which kind of spending the government did. But this was out of the macroeconomic toolbox forever. People talked about fiscal space, but I wrote a book a long time ago, just after the financial crisis, asking fiscal space for what? Matters in judging whether debt is solvent and sustainable or not. So if you look at the recent European Union borrowing program, you will find that that borrowing program has been very carefully tied and articulated to a program of spending and justified in the medium term by saying if we do this with this, then these are the returns we'll get, and that is how we justify our borrowing. So the rules of borrowing, that it must yield a return that justifies it, have not been thrown out of the window at all. The rules of borrowing still exist and ought to exist. What has been thrown out of the window is some abstract notion that some quantity of debt is bad for an economy, irrespective of the purpose for which that debt is used. Or a level of public spending is bad for an economy, irrespective of the purposes to which that public spending is used, and irrespective of the potential trade-off. That rule has gone out of the window.
What you're saying is very important. So what you're saying is that there's need for far more, not only coordination, but even a combined, just like inflation targeting would set an inflation target for the central bank, the combined policy objectives of the central bank and the spending authority should also look into where money is going to be spent by the spending authority. I'm not sure governments, such as government in India, where there's this whole debate about autonomy of the central bank, etc., and the central government saying that no, but the central bank has to work within the objectives of the central government. So, what you're saying is very important for that debate. The central government is going to have to yield over here if what you're saying is going to determine the future of macroeconomic policies in India.
So if you're talking about India, then unfortunately the situation is much worse. The government of India has no idea what its budgetary position is going to be in 2023. The government of India has no idea what the general government, that is centre plus states, budgetary position is going to be in 2023. The government of India has no idea what taxes it intends to collect successfully in 2023, even before COVID. And the government of India has no idea on track record what the fiscal deficit it would like to see in 2023, because the government of India has lost over time the capability of thinking in more than 1 year bursts.
Is this how it is in other countries?
No, it is not like this in any reasonably sophisticated economy that I know of, including developing economies.
One of the best received episodes was the one with Dr. Arvind Subramanian and Dr. Soumitra Chatterjee, both of who came to the podcast to rebut arguments made by Dr. S. Jaishankar, India's foreign minister, who had raised doubts suggesting that trade and trade agreements are hurting small Indian firms, that imports have flooded Indian markets, and that this has created employment challenges for India. Their arguments rebutting Dr. S. Shankar was so thorough that I received a number of requests for the transcript of this podcast.
Jaishankar's argument is that imports because of FTAs is causing all this hardship, right? And what I
But
want
we
to
don't
say,
have an FTA with China, which is where we are importing everything
yeah,
from.
exactly, and we're importing a lot from Europe. We're importing a lot, imports are driven by lots of things, and FTAs are one component of that. And FTAs with these ASEAN countries are an even smaller component of that, and imports from these due to the liberalization under these agreements are an even smaller fraction of that. So I think just the magnitudes are completely overplayed. Um, but now your question now about what we import, I suspect we import from these countries some inputs for exports. We import some which we consume, like whatever maybe cheaper electronics, toys from some of these countries. I think that is just a benefit of a freer trade for consumers. And I suspect part of the problem is that maybe people think that these FTAs have become a way for China to circumvent, the tariffs that are being imposed or the barriers against regular Chinese goods. And if that is the case, that's, I think, a legitimate case where I think maybe we need to take more action against that. But bottom line is that just the numbers are just don't at all add up to the kind of hill of beans that is being made out.
So let's talk about China. India has had a large trade deficit with China, like you're saying, without even having an FTA. Is Indian industry's fear of Chinese imports genuine? And I want to also, get your view on another argument which many people make, and I think TCS Srinivasa Raghavan makes it the best when he says that, China makes a mockery of standard trade theory. How can anybody have comparative advantage against China, given their economic model is characterized by very intensive state capitalism, which in fact the US now calls party capitalism? China, do you also see China as a problem in trade?
Okay, look, I think that firstly, the background to this is that India not only runs high and rising trade deficits with China, there's also, I think, a problem in terms of the pattern of trade. I think, Shomitra and I have calculated that, we predominantly export raw materials and we predominantly import, finished goods and manufactured goods. So I think that is the backdrop to understanding our, trade relationship with China. And of course, just to an aside, the notion that idols of Ganeshas, this great Indian civilization, these idols have to be imported from China. I think rankles the Indian imagination, maybe with some justification. So I think that's the context. Second, therefore, I think Indian industry is, I think, fearful based on the past record. As an economist, one shouldn't give too much weight to bilateral trade deficits, but in the real world, these things do matter. Point number two, I think this is not just TCA saying, but the world over saying, and I think I have a lot of sympathy for that view, is that China is an unusual trader, and it's a trader that deploys all kinds of policy instruments, some legitimate, but also a lot of this not so legitimate, to boost its exports. We saw famously in the 2000s, mid 2000s, Chinese currency policy was egregiously manipulated.
Yes.
We also have seen China subsidizing, providing subsidies through, its banks, through its state-owned enterprises. I think that's also, I think, a legitimate thing. And also, I don't know whether you recall a recent history when Rahul Khullar was the Commerce Secretary in India. I think he used to complain that Indian products being exported to China could also be kind of easily kept out through non-tariff barriers and other means. So the notion that trade with China is not a level playing field, given China's past behavior, is something that we have to be, utterly sensitive to. And of course, if the rest of the world has not been able to stop China from indulging in these practices, what chance do we have or RCEP partners have? I mean, it is a bit odd, isn't it, that at a time when China makes a big hullabaloo and joins RCEP, it has imposed draconian restrictions on Australian exports to China, which is part of RCEP,
Yes.
which is part of RCEP too. So I think that the fact that China is a kind of uh, quasi, I have to be careful with my words, but that it deploys a lot of things which do not lead to a level playing field, is something that I think we have to take very seriously.
So, so what would you recommend to negotiators, Indian negotiators who have so far kept out of, India's almost withdrawn from RCEP? And, while the RCEP members have left the door open, India doesn't seem inclined to join even at a later date. And the official position, of course, is that joining RCEP will have negative consequences for the economy for the reasons that we have discussed. But there's also a counter view, which is that, and which is, I think, worth debating, which is that India might be taking a bigger risk by staying out of the world's largest and perhaps most dynamic trading bloc. Would staying out of RCEP put Indian manufacturing exports at risk of losing market share to other RCEP countries? And this becomes more important when we talk about global value chains.
Yeah. So, Soumitra, please, you have to come in. Let me just say two things, and you please come in. See, I think let's take the second question first. Yeah, I think having said all that we've said, that there are problems vis-a-vis China, I think we should also be realistic and honest in saying that staying out will have costs for India. Right? These are the costs of getting cheap inputs, cheap products, the familiar gains from trade, but also losing or being discriminated in our being able to export into these markets. Now, why that is especially costly at this juncture is the thing that Soumitra and I kind of wrote about. See, if you step back, but after the global financial crisis, China was becoming richer and becoming uncompetitive in a whole range of labor-intensive goods. So that was the first opportunity for India and other countries to say, okay, we are going to fill and occupy the space vacated by China. And Soumitra and I have calculated that, in that period, China vacated space of about $140 billion or so, and India occupied very little of that. So that first opportunity, India just forwent. Then came the second opportunity with all these, which where we are today, these geopolitical tensions. There's a second kind of exit from China. Now, when those investors are looking at alternative destinations, and India is kind of offering itself up as one, India becomes a less attractive destination in this current context if the most dynamic market, ASEAN, China, is going to be more difficult to penetrate. So I think that is the particular conjunctural cost of staying out of RCEP in this moment in time. And it's a little bit, on the one hand, we're trying to offer all these incentives to all these countries, which I think we can discuss. But on the other hand, if they're going to be discriminated against in terms of selling back into this market, I think RCEP imposes some serious costs. So I think it is a cost-benefit calculation that we have to do. That's point one. But point two, I think one way of, if Jaishankar is, if he's right and he says, we haven't turned back from globalization, I think one way to respond to this would be to say, look, we've not turned away from globalization. We recognize that RCEP, is tricky for us for all the reasons we've discussed. Why don't we negotiate agreements with, say, blocs like the European Union, where in fact there's greater complementarity and less competition? So take, for example, this other piece of research that Soumitra and I showed, that we are under exporting labor-intensive goods by something between 60 to 150 billion dollars every year. That's kind of the lost India's missing exports. Now, the EU imposes tariffs on these labor-intensive products on us, but not on our competitors, Bangladesh and Vietnam, who have a leg up in the European market in these very important labor-intensive goods. So why don't we say, look, this is the opportunity for us. This is where we are underperforming. This is our also way of signaling we're not against globalization, and therefore be really serious about negotiating a free trade agreement with the European Union, which then, it will have a kind of China dimension on the strategic side. It will level the playing field and give a boost to our labor-intensive exports that we sorely need. And it will also signal that, our turning away from RCEP is for strategic other reasons, not because we're turning inward. I think that is probably the way forward.
And Soumitra, if you want to come in on what Dr. Subramanian said, but also, again, both of you, so what would your recommendations be for future trade agreements, and negotiations, especially RCEP going forward, given these points that you've made?
Yeah, so just kind of to build on what Arvind was already saying, I guess, I mean, we started the conversation by saying that, look, India is this sort of major exporting force in the world. But I think really the one sort of detail that we kind of missed there was to also say that our composition of exports is really very unique, right? And I mean, if you kind of go back to the first generation of trade theories where you gain from specialization, all those theories basically said that you specialize in sectors where you have a comparative advantage in, and in an economy like India's where you have a lot of labor force, you would have thought that India would specialize in low-skill manufacturing products. But as Arvind was saying, when you look at the data, that is precisely the sector that where we haven't done as well. So compared to our labor endowment, we are not exporting as much of low-skill manufacturing products. So things like apparel, textile, leather, and footwear. And then you have to ask the question, why is this happening? I mean, one of the reasons is that the current system of trade and exports is one where you have global value chains, and it is true. It is kind of hard to digest, but this is an important point, which is that in order to export more, you have to import more, so that if in order to become globally competitive in, let's say, textiles, our manufacturer should be able to import the best inputs at the lowest possible prices. But if you look at the tariffs on let's say, man-made yarn, which is a key input for textiles, amongst all our competitors, it is the highest, and that hurts our exports. On top of it, sort of not having a trade agreement with the European Union hurts on the output side, because there we have to compete with Bangladesh, whose exports of textiles attract no tariffs. So kind of strategically thinking about where we want to integrate more, that helps our exports is important.
In the episode on Bangladesh versus India's economic record, Dr. Shamika Ravi made very important observations about female labor participation and the role it plays in growth and development of an economy. It's hard not to agree with her on her remarks about the romanticism in economic policy debates in India.
Well, the neighborhood, Puja, is notorious for low female labor force participation. But low female labor force participation is something that a lot of these traditional Asian societies have struggled with, including Japan, for instance, or China, South Korea, definitely. So it is not just the neighborhood; it's a larger Asian story, barring, of course, the Philippines and other areas and countries where women have been at the forefront of the economy. But in the South Asian context, many of our neighbors and India, we have had low labor force participation. But we are peculiar because with growth, our labor force participation of women have actually fallen. Unlike everywhere else, China, South Korea included, and Bangladesh included. With growth, I think Bangladesh labor force participation of women has now it's up to almost 36%, and has been rising. Our number, on the other hand, has been declining. So our number is close to around 20%. We were close to 30 about two and a half decades back, and now female labor force participation has declined. So that remains a big enigma and a cause of worry. But Pooja, you
It's
have to go
possibly
beyond
because
the gender.
no, I'm saying
Huh.
it's possibly because the kind of composition of growth that India has seen, where it is not manufacturing led anymore, and manufacturing probably is where women would find it easier to get jobs when they move out of agriculture as agriculture gets mechanized. Probably that is what explains the difference, because women will typically not migrate to the cities for the kind of jobs that men do. And when you overall do not, when the economic growth is such that it's not very job intensive, then if there are fewer jobs relative to number of people who are willing to work, then men will generally manage to get those jobs more than women would.
True.
Does
True.
that explain the?
I think the gender component of this entire argument is definitely a powerful one, but the story really is beyond gender, Pooja. Now, but before I get to the larger labor cost issues, the one aspect of the fertility decline we have to, and these are sensitive issues in India, but I think it's important for us to, as economists, to address them, full on, because think of the fertility rate in Bangladesh. They have reached replacement rate. Right. With us, we do know that the fertility rate in India has not yet reached, and there are huge variations across different demographic, different religious groups in India. So the Muslim population, for instance, the fertility rate is around 2.6%, which is way above the replacement rate. So we have to ask, why is it that while a Muslim majority and a fairly orthodox society has been able to achieve this drastic decline in fertility, we have not? While we were ahead of the curve as far as economic sort of growth was concerned. And that's where I think, the data on, the health data becomes interesting, because we do see that access to contraceptives, for instance, institutional deliveries for women, Muslim women, is much lower than an average Indian woman. There are less than 70% deliveries that happen in institutions. Use of modern contraceptives, again, less than 37%, while all India is around 50%. So there is that part of the story we also have to try and unpack and understand, and we need a lot more research and understanding, some degree of policy intervention. But the larger issue as far as Bangladesh's growth is concerned is, I think, they really did go in for, their sector, which has helped, grow the economy, has been investing in labor intensive technologies. Unlike in our case, where a lot of apparel sector in India still remain capital intensive. And this will perhaps take you back to Mahalanobis in the 60s, when he said that, in India, welfare measures tend to be implemented ahead of economic growth. So we've had relatively stringent labor laws, minimum wage legislations, which have kept a very large part of the economy underground or informal, and has driven sectors even like apparel, which tend to be largely labor intensive. In India, they are far more capital intensive than elsewhere.
True, and I'm reminded of an article that Professor Kaushik Basu wrote sometime back, a few years back, in fact, about the Bangladesh economy, comparing it with India, in which he said that Bangladesh also, there was a sort of a blessing in disguise for them, because the Industrial Disputes Act, for instance, which restricts firms' ability to hire contract workers and expand labor force, was enacted just a few months before August 1947, when India and Pakistan, what is now Pakistan, what is now Bangladesh, got independence. And before Bangladesh was formed as a country, the Pakistan's military regime sort of was very impatient with trade unions in that part of the country, and they sort of repealed this act over there.
There
And
you go.
the Bangladesh, garment manufacturers have been able to take advantage of the Missing Industrial Disputes Act to expand, which
Right.
makes their labor market a lot more flexible than it is in India.
Right.
And I've been sort of talking about this, labor law issue to a variety of economists, and I do hear this all the time that the labor laws have done nothing. In fact, the presence of a large informal sector confirms that labor laws are not good, and yet the same economists argue that any steps that we are hearing of that are being taken, which, by the way, only today in an interview, the IMF's Geeta Gopinath has praised. Economists don't support those reforms in the labor laws. Um, the labor laws are not working for either employment or the quality of work conditions for labor, and yet people want to hold on to those laws. I don't understand this argument. What is
No,
your
but
stand on
Puja,
this?
no, you're right. But I think it depends on now. That is where we do have different spectrum. In terms of looking at the economy and what perhaps is the right way ahead. And I must confess, for a long time we have been romantics. No, I mean we've had a very sort of a left view of how markets should be restricted, really, in India. And that is where I think Mahalanobis's quote becomes very important when he says welfare measures are often implemented ahead of economic growth, and we have seen that up until now, which means doesn't exist a consensus, or frankly, beyond a consensus, I would say we have not yet seen a rights, or an economic right, which is individual rights driven view of growth in India. We have often had a very left oriented view, and which is where I think, we've had a lot of those early measures brought in, where we saw that even in terms of our own growth story, a lot of the reforms that happened in the early 90s or under NDA 1, from UPA era onwards, we really did not bring about many growth oriented strategies. No, I mean RTI,
In
NREG, these are all
fact,
fantastic from
yeah,
the
in fact,
right.
when we go back and read the parliament speeches that Dr. Manmohan Singh, for instance, made when he was finance minister, I think after that, and those are worth reading, but after that, we have not had anybody, no finance minister, no prime minister, try to explain to people of India the importance of markets, the importance of moving away from the sort of left influenced way of thinking about the economy. I don't know why that voice has gone silent. I find that often a lot of people tend to take positions on these matters without even fully understanding what it means. For instance, only today in the morning, I saw somebody saying, something about there should be price caps, for instance, on testing for COVID. People don't understand the importance of, letting the free market operate where it does. There are many places where the free market doesn't work well. We all know about market failures, but there are many places where it does work well. But, people don't understand that. And they take positions, and people begin to lend support to these arguments without even understanding fully what they are supporting. So I think part of the problem also is that pro market economists are either not given the space, or they don't come out and they're not as vocal. After Dr. Manmohan Singh, I've really not seen anybody make these arguments in a big way.
But Pooja, I think I mean Dr. Manmohan Singh, being an economist, and I must say, I mean, he very intelligent, and his speeches make for great listening. But if just that revealed preference is in the actions you take, and the policies that we have seen. right from the beginning of UPA, have not really been growth oriented. So what I'm saying is, while I have done a lot of research on NREG, and I think it did wonderful for poverty alleviation, on health insurance expansion. You see, RTI, I think one of the most fundamental changes, and towards good governance, etc. But these were not growth strategies, Pooja. And I think from 2012 onwards, private enterprise, it's almost like the Indian state has been at war with private enterprise. And the growth which we had in UPA2 was a largely credit driven growth. And I think that is where we have to distinguish short term growth and long term growth, which means that for the longest time we've been saying factor market reforms have not happened. We have really not got taken a stab at agriculture reforms right from 1991 onwards. A lot of those things remained on the back burner, and I think that's why economists often said land, labor, agriculture, etc. It was almost like you could just sing out this list out this series of reforms which was supposed to happen and they did not, and which is why India's growth was not as what the potential ought to be. But today, when those reforms are happening, I think people either are getting politically embroiled and they don't know what position to take, or the thinking is very muddled. So what you're asking is a very important question. Now think about it. And it's not just the government, Pooja. And I think this is where we all have to realize economy is much more than the government. Government is a large part of it, yes. But from the kind of laws, the retrospective law, the tax law, right? I mean, the damage it has done in terms of bringing uncertainty. Then I think the role of the Supreme Court itself, the coal block
Absolutely,
allocation.
the coal block
I mean,
allocation,
can you
which
imagine what it means in terms of 18 years
more
later?
than a decade, yeah, more, yeah.
Yes, and the
Full
impact it
businesses
has.
have grown on the basis of those
Yes.
allocations, and overnight, that basic fact changes.
So I think that is where in the Indian growth story, you see different parts. And even in terms of what you just said, the cap for testing. If you remember in April, the confusion, large part of it in the early stage was also created because the courts got involved and they said it should be free testing.
Dr. Lekha Chakraborty also spoke about gender and human development issues and was very insightful on the theory, definitions, policy, data measurement, and other such issues related to the statistically invisible part of the economy. People criticize the obsession with GDP and macroeconomic policy frameworks. In this context, the conversation with her resonated with a lot of listeners.
So when we talk about the economy, it has two components. One is the market economy and the other is an invisible care economy, which is unmonetized. But in 1993, Systems of National Accounts by the United Nations Statistical Division has appropriately pointed out that we need to extend the prediction boundary and integrate what is economic activity at this non-monetized sector, because economic activity is an economic activity whether it is monetized or non-monetized. So many of the work done at the informal, at the household and the societal levels, these are not getting captured. So they count it and kept it as a satellite accounts, but it is not integrated into GDP because of the pricing methodology or something. Because the moment we get the data ready from the time use or some other innovative statistics, then only we can start looking into how to measure this. So one of the major issues of recognizing this issue is how to measure gender development or how to measure human development. And this measurement issues were quite strong because GDP could not contain the human development perspectives. And that revolution happened, that we started constricting the human development index, but it may not be containing all the human perspectives of the choices of the people into the three dimensions within the human development index. But that measure, how to measure beyond GDP, how to measure a gender-aware human development became a major question. And in this measurement issues, before getting into the policy, it's a journey actually. You look into the theoretical constructs of macroeconomic frameworks, macroeconomy, and you understand that the theoretical constructs are not integrating the human perspectives. Then from the theoretical constructs, you're getting into the data and the empirics, and then get into the public policy. So this is a journey. So how we began with the theoretical constructs, that it is beyond GDP, that is very important. Then coming to the data was quite constrained, and we need to have innovative data to capture this process. Then time use survey was floated, and then getting the insights from them, from these inferences, then how to incorporate that into the public policy narrative. So this is the way that thread, if I look at, I can, tell you. Yeah.
So you're saying that we need to do this in a sequence. We need to first look at the theoretical models and see where these issues, gender issues or human development issues, can be integrated. In order to integrate them into the empirical models that are used, we would need data and statistics. So new data
Absolutely.
systems will have to be designed. But does that also mean, like you said, that GDP only counts the monetized part of the economy? It does not account for the care economy, which, for the benefit of
Absolutely.
my listeners, if you could also explain the difference. Are you saying something that, for instance, a bottled water, mineral water, is counted in GDP, but if a woman goes and fetches water from a well walking 10 kilometers, that does not get counted in GDP, but it should actually count in GDP. Is
Yeah.
that what you're talking about? That difference?
Yeah, wonderful. That's a concern, and you have explained it so nice. That's what, if you take the time chronology of a woman, let's do it qualitatively, and then come to the quantitative perspectives. As you pointed out, when we look at it qualitatively, a woman may be spending 5 hours or 10 hours to collect the water, and then she's, or maybe fuel load, but the moment you are going to impute the value to what is the output, or what she has collected in terms of fuel load, if it is 1 quintal, you are assigning the same value to both women, like the woman who traveled half an hour and the woman who traveled 1 hour. You're going to give the same value. As you rightly pointed out, the intensity of the efforts of a woman is not getting captured the moment we go for a pricing methodology. That is one. Second is, in this revolution, what has happened in the systems of national accounts is, like, you categorize the kind of, the time chronology into three. One is the systems of national accounts kind of economic activities which get into GDP already. Then the second category is extended systems of national account framework. That is, after the UNST extended the prediction boundary, what are the new kind of economic activities which is not monetized but getting into the GDP, getting into the as economic activity. And the third category is a non-SNA, like certain things, like certain values, like loving your kid, on your behalf, I cannot love your kid. So those kind of things, or those kind of personal care or something, we are not going to compute. But in the time chronology, something is statistically invisible, but it is a clear economic activity or a clear work as per the ILO definition that needs to be integrated. And then only the policy formulators will be able to understand what is statistically invisible. Because if we focus only on the monetized, the GDP part, the overall well-being of the country will not be as much as if we incorporate the resource allocation and the decision-making process and the time chronology in this non-monetized sector where women and men do economic activity. So that's why the importance of the time use survey.
Understood. And will this does it require because there is a debate even outside of this matter on, how accurately GDP represents economic activity. So is a prerequisite for what you're talking, the updation of the definition itself of GDP, wherever it is possible to have a price value of economic activity at least?
Absolutely. And I remember you have written about this beyond GDP very recently. And this question you're asking that regarding the activities which we need to integrate with the GDP, the valuation process is a big concern in the sense, there could be a valuation from input side. You impute the market wages for the work which is done in the care economy, so may not be that wage specific to each of the work done in the care economy. So maybe in the wage hierarchy in the market, you take the minimum wage and impute to all the work done in the care economy, and you come with a value. And on the other hand, as we have already discussed, that you impute a pricing to it. So that can create a lot of problems because as you rightly pointed out, that the intensity of effort of a woman or a man in doing that job may not get captured. So there are kind of, issues.
Finally, let me leave you with this snatch from the conversation with the very eloquent and nuanced Dr. Suranjali Tandon, in which she explained so simply why India's income tax to GDP ratio is low and dispelled some widely held myths about who pays how much tax. With this, let's wrap the recap of 2020. Stay tuned for the conversations of 2021.
Is the number of people in India who file and pay income tax, is that a large enough number as a proportion of the total population? And if you have the numbers, how many people pay some amount of income tax in India? Is this, a big enough number, or is there reason to believe that a significant proportion of the population still evades or avoids taxes?
Thank you for the question, Pooja. It's quite relevant because I believe the Prime Minister, when he made his speech on the 13th of August, also brought up the point that the taxpayers are very few in India. And I think for many years it has been a cause of concern, with the CBDT focusing its attention to it. The economic survey also looked at the aspect of fewer taxpayers and how we could expand the base. I feel there are many aspects to this. While we say that there should be more taxpayers in the system, there are reasons why we may have seemingly insufficient number of taxpayers. To begin with, at the moment, there are about 8 crore individuals who file tax returns and pay taxes. And this would include individuals who are salaried, who have business income, or other sources of income. Now, why has the tax base been small, which is just about 5.6% of the total population of India? There are two main reasons that I can think of. One is that agricultural income has been left out of the ambit of income tax, and the other reason is that the exemption threshold has been revised significantly and frequently over the years after 2000. Now, there is a logic to both of these. One is that we wanted to leave agriculture out because it's a state subject, and to bring it within the ambit of taxation, income taxes would require us to amend the constitution to bring the states on board. And the exemption threshold was revised over a period of time with the idea that people have a certain cost of living. We must adjust for that and then have people to pay taxes after these are taken care of. But what we notice is that in terms of exemptions, the adjustments were in fact quite large. And if we were to look at the changes in policy after 2000, there was a significant increase, almost a doubling of the exemption threshold. So we went from 50,000 to 1 lakh. And then over the years, now we have 2.5 lakh as the exempted income. And this is about 2.5 times of the per capita GDP. So what this means is that we may be excluding a part of the population which should be filing tax returns or may potentially pay us taxes. But the related question, I think an important question, is that if we were to include these in the taxpayers' base, we were to bring these people into the tax system, then what is the kind of revenue gain we would achieve? Because often the criticism is that while we could expand the exemption threshold, lower the exemption threshold to expand the taxpayers' base, we may not get this appropriate revenue gains. So in fact, estimating this through surveys, the sense that we have that you could expand the taxpayers base, which is different from tax base, which is to say the number of people who would file returns and pay taxes would go up to say 11 or 14% if we include agriculture income tax. And the revenue gain for this we cannot estimate, but for agriculture, it would be just 1.7% or little less than 2% in terms of
GDP.
revenue gain. Yes. So, so I believe we could partition the question is to say that we have a small taxpayers base, but I guess we will also talk about why the tax GDP ratio is less and why the tax paid is less. So I think those two questions often are confused with one another. They might be related, but there's a little bit of segregation. So what I've just spoken about is that one of the reasons why fewer people pay taxes is because of the exemptions and the exclusions that we've built into our system.
So are you saying that even if we were to include these people who currently get left out of the tax system, the tax net because of the exemptions, the cost of the tax system to go through their returns versus the benefit of the revenue that will be gained from that exercise, it may not be worth it? Is that what you're saying?
Perhaps. So I was trying to actually get to that, saying that we have to do cost-benefit analysis. If you look at agriculture, if the revenue gain is just about 2% of the GDP, and even what we've noticed is that there has been a increase in taxpayers' base, the number of returns filed, for example, at the lower end after demonetization. Now, while this is a gain for the tax department, if you continue to see a rise or an expansion in the taxpayers' base at the bottom end, it could be slightly costly to review these returns. And the gain that we hope from the expansion of the taxpayers' base may not automatically result in gains in tax collections.